Não, não, você viu que já viu o outro aqui, o Bing. É uma disputa de cachorro grande, os bilionários do planeta. Então agora aqui o Bill Gates. Bom dia, vamos retomar aqui o Colloquium Kant. O professor Ricardo Criciúma vai conduzir os trabalhos agora de manhã. Por isso que eu não crio o resultado. É isso que eu trabalho. Nada disso faria se fosse no meu.
Bom dia. Obrigada. Pois é, lamentável. Não, daí não pode.
Pode deixar. Iniciar, pode.
Só eu te cortei o não é a gente, não é a gente. Eu não tenho mais idade. Já comecei com
Olá, bom dia a todos e todas. Vamos começar, então, nosso segundo dia do colóquio. Welcome all. We are going to start our second day of our colloquium. A primeira fala é da professora Maria Borges, da Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina. O título é Kant's Enlightenment and His Conception of Women. Então, ela terá 30 minutos de apresentação, e daí depois os 10 minutos que complementam os 40, a gente vai reservar para o debate, depois da segunda fala. Então, the first talk will be delivered by Maria Borges, professor of the Federal University of Santa Catarina. Her talk is entitled Kant Enlightenment and His Conception of Women. So, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank first Professor Nitamar de Oliveira for inviting me to be here and present my talk. Amen. Gostaria de agradecer ao professor Nitamar por ter me convidado, e gostaria de agradecer também à Sociedade Canto Brasileira, na pessoa da professora Silvia Altman, que também está organizando esse congresso junto com a PUC, e agradecer o Departamento de Filosofia e Pós-Graduação da PUC do Rio Grande do Sul. Bom, my talk will be in English, and it's about Kant's theory about women. Não estou conseguindo fazer aqui. Sorry.
Ah.
Não. Ah, ok. Vai ser assim? Vai ser assim? Tá, ok. Então, certinho. É que eu não tinha conseguido. Okay. Is Kant theory about women? Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. About women, but it will be projected there. Anyway. A flaw in his Enlightenment project. This is my talk. In this conference, I aim at analyzing Kantian view of women in order to ask whether his theory was a progressive or a conservative one, and if his vision on gender was a flaw in his Enlightenment project. The first part, I will analyze the conception of the female gender in Kant. I will start from the distinction between the beautiful and the sublime, showing that it means to be the fair sex for Kant, what it means to be the fair sex for Kant. I show, sorry.
Just 1 minute. We have a problem that we have to transmit the slides. So
Okay.
It's only
We
showing
need-
for us,
yeah.
not for
Okay.
the transmission.
Tem um monte de gente do meu lado.
Mas não,
Acho que alguma coisa está acontecendo. Ninguém teve coragem de
sorry. Now, yeah, now
melhor começar de novo. Agora tá muito. Agora tá ok. Eu fiquei na ideia de start again.
Is that okay? Now,
yeah.
yeah,
All right.
may start again. Okay. This
Sorry.
conference, I aim at analyzing, no. Thank you. This conference, I aim at analyzing Kantian views of women in order to ask whether his theory was a progressive or a conservative one, and if his vision on gender was a flaw in his Enlightenment project. In the first part, I will analyze the conception of the female gender. In Kant, I will start from the distinction between the beautiful and the sublime, showing what it means to be the fair sex for Kant. I show that beautiful morality is based on moral feelings and implies an inability to act according to principles. I then refer to the feminine virtues, relating them to the promotion of culture and social refinement. The second part, I ask what is enlightenment for Kant and if women should take part in this project. I show that the answer is negative because women, for Kant, are not capable of principles. Moreover, they are not considered full citizens. Woman is beautiful, man is sublime. In the observations on the feeling of the beautiful and the sublime, Kant claims that those who refer to woman as the fair sex, even if they think they are only praising her, succeeded in arriving at the characteristic of her character. It's not just a matter of a facial or bodily complexion, which are usually finer and more delicate than in the male gender, or even their power of enchantment, or their expressions more amiable and affable. The mark of the beautiful for Kant refers primarily to the character of the female mind, while that of the sublime refers to the male mind. This difference between the genders should guide all education and instruction, as well as the ethical perfection of both. In order to explain what this beautiful character consists in, Kant starts from sensibility and taste, going up to understanding. He begins by noting that women have a natural feeling for adornments and decoration. About knowledge, Kant states that women have as much understanding as men, yet it's a beautiful understanding, while man's is a deeper understanding. It means a sublime understanding. This implies that women should be understood as more superficial in their intellectual life. This is not only a descriptive statement for Kant, but a normative one, as Kant advised women not to devote themselves to laborious study or the painful reasoning. Then I will quote Kant. I like this quote here, but it's very sexist, but anyway. Laborious learning or painful grubbing, even if a woman could get very far with them, destroy the merits that are proper to her sex, and on account of their rarity, may well make her into an object of a cold admiration. But at the same time, they will weaken the charms by means of which she exercised her great power over the opposite sex. It means that women can do this laborious learning and all that, but they will lack then their charms. And their charms is to be beautiful and not sublime. Women then can do science and philosophy, but they would lose their charm to men. As they approach to the sublime means like science and even philosophy, they will arouse admiration and respect, but they will lack the traits of beautiful. Then if they lack the traits of beautiful, they will not be charming anymore, and then they will lose their power over men. And this woman there is Anne de Dacier. And you put some women that Kant mentioned in his pictures of some women paintings, and some women that Kant mentioned in his works. This is Anne de Dacier. Here is Anne de Dacier. She was a translator of Greek. She translated Homer and also Aristotle for, I think that English, and at the time of Kant. And the following of this quote, that quote that I quoted before, is even more offensive in relation to female gender. I think that this is the most sexist quote by Kant, showing a certain indignation of Kant towards the women of his time who carried out intellectual and scientific work. I think that Kant said that in the observation of sublime and beautiful. And then after that, I think that he never repeat this again, but this you can think that's a pre-critical and early works, but then he'll be not that sexist, but this is very sexist. A woman who has a head full of Greek, like Madame de Dacier, or who conducts through all disputation about mechanics, then the Marquise de Châtelet, show Marquise de Châtelet, might as well wear a beard, sorry. For that might perhaps better express the meaning of death for which they strive. Then what he's saying is that, okay, they want to be sublime, they want to show how intellectual they are, and then it's better to use a beard because to show this seriousness. That he was very sexist in the school. And there we have a translation of Madame de Dacier, but that's a translation to French. And she translated Odisseia, the UFRGS, par Madame de Dacier. And this is the Madame de Dacier that he mentioned. And the other one was Marquise de Châtelet. Then there is Marquise de Châtelet. She was a scientist at that moment, and she translated Newton mechanics for French too. Kant advises women to return to the beautiful understanding and approach that which is the realm of feeling, leaving abstract speculation to men. Women's education should be based more on feelings than on rules or abstract knowledge. I quote Kant. This is very sexist. Likewise, they do not need to know more of the cosmos than it's necessary to make the view of the heavens in beautiful evening moving for them. It means like, then you have this Madame Chatelet, and she was a physicist, and then what Kant is saying that, okay, women should have some education, but just a kind of beautiful education, perhaps some names, I don't know, but exactly, but some names of the stars that she could enjoy, have a starry heaven, but not exactly to make these calculations of the moving and of the planets and all that. That was what I think that Madame Chatelet used to do. In the arts, as in painting or music, the expression of feeling should be emphasized in order to elevate the taste in the female gender, as well as to have some connection with moral emotions. A morality without principles. Kant claims that female morality is a morality of sensibility and not of principles. It doesn't mean that we do not, that people should not be educated, women should not be educated, but women should be educated mostly regarding their feelings, their sensibility, but not principles. It does not mean that women would not be able also to perform good deeds, but that their action would lack genuine moral value, even if their moral judgment about actions would be based on sensibility. Then we have a limit. Women's morality is a beautiful morality. It's based on sensibility and on moral sentiments, moral feelings. Thus, beauty designates the feeling of sympathy and compassion typical of the female gender. Even if it's not a full morality, women have a great sensibility in noticing small moral flaws, perhaps imperceptible to the male perception. Quote Kant, women are very sensitive to the least offense and are exceedingly quick to notice the least lack of attention and respect toward themselves. End of quotation. Their judgment of a good or wrong action is not guided by moral principles, but is related to the feeling of pleasure and displeasure provoked by an action. Kant considers it difficult to think that women act on moral principles, claiming that benevolent feelings take place of morality. He apologized, however, saying that he does not mean to offend the fair sex, because acting on principle would also be rare in the male gender. Virtues of men and women. In the observations of the feeling of the beautiful and the sublime, Kant states that women's virtues are beautiful, while men's are sublime. The virtue of a woman is a beautiful virtue. That of a male gender ought to be a noble virtue. Women will avoid evil not because it is unjust, but because it's ugly. And for them, virtuous actions mean those that are ethically beautiful. Nothing of ought, nothing of must, nothing of obligation. End of quotation. Which are these beautiful virtues for Kant? One of them is to be led by sadness, by offense or setbacks of fortune. It's beautiful for a woman to transform her sadness into tears without thereby dissipating her virtue. It's just for women, not for men. On the contrary, a man should never weep except magnanimous tears, showing his pain for the setbacks of fortune, making him contemptible. In another quotation, Kant says that men can have tears in their eyes as long as they don't make any noise while crying, just like some small tears. What is a defect for a man is considered a virtue for a woman. In the Anthropology, Kant claims that the expression of emotions can be beneficial for women. Showing emotions is a beautiful virtue, even if it's not recommended to the male gender. In the love relationship between the genders, Kant is very, very conservative, but nowadays people are conservative as well. And Kant defends and justifies the passive position of the woman and the active position of man. The woman refuses, the man requests. The woman needs to appear cold, the man full affection of love. But there are many people in the websites and the social media that influencers that are saying the same, then he's not that old fashioned. The difference, according to the philosopher, is anchored in nature. I quote Kant: nature wants that the woman be sought after, therefore she herself does not need to be so particular in her choice in matters of taste as the man, whom nature has also built more coarsely, and who already pleased the woman if only his physique shows that he has strength and ability to protect her. For if she were disgusted with regard to the beauty of his physique and refined in her choice, then she would have to do the wooing in order to be able to fall in love, while he would have to appear to refuse, which would entirely degrade the value of her sex, even in the eyes of men. The man chooses among the women the one he likes best. Women should not be so specific in their taste and refined in their choice, either because they should choose among those who choose them, or because male beautiful does not have great attraction, only their vigor and ability to defend her. The choice of a partner is reserved for men. It is up to women to seduce in a light and not explicit way. The woman should never choose, because if she would assume the role of suitor and could be rejected, which would be an embarrassment for her in her chosen one. Within a refined language, Kant does not depart from the conception that woman is the hunted, the man the hunter. Then I go to enlightenment. The polemic about what's meaning of enlightenment has begun now. I address the main topic, Kant, women, and enlightenment. The polemic about what's meaning of enlightenment has begun with an article written by the priest Johann Friedrich Zollner in the Berlinische Monatschrift of December 1783. He opposed civil marriage and sustained religious marriage. According to Johann Zollner, people was referring to enlightenment to explain their support to civil marriage instead of religious marriage. Then he asked, what is enlightenment? Many philosophers and scholars have answered this question. The following month, Mendelssohn, Herder, Schiller, Kant. Kant answered the question, the issue of 1784. Then what's enlightenment for Kant? I quote Kant: enlightenment is the human being emergency for his self-incurred minority. Minority is the ability to make use of one understanding without direction from another. This minority is self-incurred when it causes lies, not in lack of understanding, but in the lack of resolution and courage to use it without direction from another. Sapere aude, have courage to make use of your own understanding. This is the motto of enlightenment. The human being should leave the state of minority. However, this state is easier to stay on instead of questioning what to do. It's uncomfortable to be a minor. To have a book or spirit advisor who can advise me, it's more comfortable than to think by myself. That by far the greatest part of humanity, including the entire fair sex, should hold a step toward majority to be not only troublesome, but also rightly dangerous, will soon be seen by those guardians who have kindly taken it upon themselves to supervise them. My aim here is to analyze this expression, including the entire fair sex. Does it mean that this part of humanity should take a step to the enlightenment, or that it's impossible to women to be enlightened? First, we take into account that he doubts that the individual could accomplish this task by itself. Thus, it's difficult for a single individual to extirpate himself, and that has become almost, but anyway, he has even grown fond of it, and is really unable for the time being to make use of his own understanding, because he has never allowed to make the attempt. Then it's difficult, and it's very unlikely that a person by herself could get rid of her own minority. That is the reason why Kant says that it's more likely that a public and not the individual would do it. However, The public is pushed by individuals, by independent thinkers who, after having themselves cast off the yoke of minority, will disseminate the spirit of a rational valuing of one's own worth and of calling of individual to think for himself. End of quotation. The question here persists in another form. Do women belong to this public who could enlighten itself? We have here a moral and a political aspect of this question. The moral question, is it possible for women to think by themselves, meaning the use of their own understanding? Kant claims that women cannot think through principles. Kant proposed that her education should be not directed by development of reason, but to finish. Just keep this quotation. It's hard to think that someone who can barely use principles could put in practice the sabere aude and the part of the enlightenment and be a part of the enlightenment. Can women be a part of the enlightenment? I quote Kant, then if you take what is said in the, I am not quoting Kant, it's me. Then if you take what is said, the observations on the feeling of beautiful and sublime, the answer is negative. Why would one pervert the beautiful soul with the deep reasoning of the sublime? Kant even says that instead of teach women astronomy, we should only, as I quoted before, show only what is necessary to make the views of the heaven and of beautiful evening moving from them, for them. End of quotation. To keep women in this idyllic and beautiful naivete and ignorance seems to be the aim of the text. Not to reasoning, but to feel. In this context, the imperative sabere aude seems not to apply to women. Instead, the motto suitable for women would be, don't think, just feel. The political answer is a necessary condition of the enlightened to be a citizen. I believe that the idea of enlightenment can only be supported in a society where persons are citizens. Can women be a citizen? In the Doctrine of Right, Kant claims that, I quote the Heslera, the only qualification to be a citizen is being fit to vote, but being fit to vote presupposes the independence of someone who, as one of the people, want to be not just part of the Commonwealth, but also a member of it. That is, a part of the Commonwealth, acting from his own choice in community of others. End of quotation. Kant admits two kinds of citizenship, passive and active, and women belong to the second rank, along with a woodcutter, the private tutor, as opposed to the school teacher or the blacksmith in India, as opposed to the European carpenter. All these people, including women, lack civil personality and are considered mere underlings of the Commonwealth because they have to be under the direction or protection of other individuals, and so do not possess civil independence. This dependence is not opposed to their quality as human beings. However, they are not citizens, but only passive parts. They are passive citizens. They are kind of passive citizenship. They are only passive parts of the state. If it is the case, then women wouldn't be enlightened as long as they stay in this inferior condition of a passive citizen. How much do I have?
Or about 9 minutes.
9 minutes, okay. Now you just ask, the idea that women cannot have civil status as citizens is also stressed in the anthropology. Although they have ability to talk, this is also very sexist. They have ability to talk, they talk too much for Kant. In a fluent and convincing way, they are not allowed to represent themselves regarding their civil rights. He says, women talk a lot, but they could represent even their husbands, but because they talk a lot, but they are not allowed to do this. And I call it anthropology. It's true that when it comes to talking, woman by nature of her sex has enough of a mouth to represent both herself and her husband, even in court, where it concerns mine and thine, and so could literally be declared to be overmature, übermündig. But just as it does not belong to women to go to war, this is another reason. Just as it does not belong to women to go to war, so women cannot personally defend their rights and pursue civil affairs for themselves. but only by means of representative. I will skip to the last part. Could Kant have done otherwise? That's my question. Is he just a son of his time, or if he's more sexist than he should be? He should have been. In the Kantian project of is the Kantian project of a woman a flaw in his Enlightenment project? Conception of women, a flaw in his Enlightenment project? The answer is positive if Enlightenment aims to free of women beings from moral and legal minority. According to what is suggested in the text, Kant wants to liberate all the humanity, but leaving women aside, because they cannot and should not use their understanding. And then comes the difficult question. Could he have done otherwise, or should we justify this flaw by the limits of his time? Now I go to the French Revolution. Let's take for a moment the French Revolution and the first declaration of rights of men and citizens. Although the reference of citizens were meant to be neutral, Olympe de Gouges, and it's the picture of Olympe de Gouges, thought otherwise. According to this member of the Girondins, women were not considered as citizens and deserved to have their own declaration of rights. That is the reason why she proposed declaration for the rights of women and the female citizens, where we read in the paragraph 10, if a woman has the right to go up to the scaffold, she must also have the right to go up to the tribune. This will be an answer to, you're right, the Olympe de Gouges. Exactly. And she'll be beheaded. and then this will be the answer to Kant, because Kant says if a woman cannot go to war, then she should not have rights, be an active citizen. And then here is this answer of Olympe de Gouges. If a woman has the right to go to the scaffold, then she must also have the rights to go to the tribune, to be a citizen. If a woman can be accused and beheaded, she could also be a citizen. These arguments can be considered a refutation of Kantian position, according to which if women do not have the duty to go to war, they cannot have the status of a citizen. Olympe de Gouges was beheaded in 1793. In the year 1792, another feminist philosopher, Mary Wollstonecraft, also wrote a feminist manifest on the indication of the rights of women, supporter of the French Revolution, and very enthusiastic of this new conception of freedom and citizenship brought by this movement. She went to France at the end of the year 1792. She had the hope that the rights of women were incorporated in the French Constitution. Unfortunately, it never happened. The Constitution of 1793, based on declarations of the right of men and citizens, has established the universal right to vote, but only for men. It's not misleading to say that women were not considered citizens in the most powerful political movements issued from the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. Although freedom is symbolized, here we have the famous painting of Delacroix, freedom guiding the people, that's a woman, the idea of a woman citizen was a dream far from reality. It's realistic to demand from the philosopher Königsberg what the French Revolution was incapable to do, give women a status of citizen. Indeed, in the conflict of faculties, Kant leaves open the possibility to the universal citizenship when he claims the idea of a constitution in harmony of the natural right of human beings, one namely in which the citizens, obedient to the law besides being united, ought also to be legislative, lies at the basis of all political forms. Go to conflict of faculties. But the text is not clear if this applies to women. Kant's philosophy did not have, that's my conclusion, did not have a place for women as full persons and citizens, but neither had the Enlightenment. Kant's philosophy was sexist, but so was Enlightenment. And then the women here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being on time. And now we will follow to our next presentation, our next talk that will be delivered by Professor Nitamar de Oliveira. Nitamar is professor here in PUC of the state of Rio Grande do Sul. And the title of his talk is Normative Challenge for Kantian AI Ethics. So, Professor Nitamar, if you are already.
Yes, sir.
We'll just change the slides here.
Well, first of all, let me thank Professors Silvia Altman, Ricardo Criciúma, Brighton Gonzaga de Souza, and Jair Tautin for organizing this wonderful colloquium. And I'd like also to mention my gratitude to Professor Christoph Hord, who made all this way from Germany to take part in this event. Well, I'll just be offering a few slides here just as a means of a presentation to provoke some reactions from you guys, because of course this is not very clearly what kind of contribution we're going to get from Immanuel Kant for a Kantian ethics of AI, or artificial intelligence. In the face of rapidly advancing artificial intelligence technology, the need for an ethical framework that addresses the moral and political implications of AI governance becomes increasingly urgent, as attested by AI theories of value alignment. This paper proposed a Kantian-inspired AI ethics of Republican egalitarian governance, drawing from Immanuel Kant's ethical and political theories to offer a robust foundation for AI ethics and a feminist critical theory of AI governance. By integrating the foundational principles of Kant's deontological ethics with insights from Rawls and feminist critiques, we propose a hybrid deontological model of AI ethics that combines teleological and utilitarian models. Value alignment points thus to the importance of treating humanity as an end in itself and adhering to the so-called second version of the categorical imperative, also called the humanity formula. Which requires that all actions be universalizable and applied to all human beings. For AI ethics, this translates into several key principles, such as assuming that no other value can be more fundamental or foundational than human dignity and worth. This principle is critical in ensuring that AI technologies are developed and deployed in ways that respect and enhance human life rather than threaten, diminish, or annihilate it. The foundational value of humanity must be universalizable, meaning that it applies to all individuals regardless of particular features such as nationality, gender, race, religion, social class, income, etc. This aligns with Kant's emphasis on moral laws, universal validity, and applicability. To address the complexities of modern societies and cultural diversity, Kantian AI ethics must be intersectionally egalitarian, acknowledging and addressing individuals' diverse and intersecting identities and experiences. This involves recognizing and mitigating how AI technologies might reinforce or exacerbate existing social inequalities, including those of gender and ethnicity, especially in emerging democracies such as Brazil and Latin America. Oh, this is basically an abstract of this presentation. The idea is to resort to what Rawls called reflective equilibrium. It wasn't his invention. He borrowed this from Nelson Goodman's philosophy of science. And the idea here is that Kant, just like Spinoza, Rawls, and many other authors, should be placed between Plato's realism, moral realism, and David Hume's non-cognitivist takes on moral philosophy. Cultivating moral virtues, especially a sense of justice, is essential in guiding the development and use of AI. This involves fostering virtues in individuals and institutions to ensure that AI technologies are aligned with the broader goal of promoting justice and the common good. AI ethics should also consider the outcomes and consequences of AI technologies, aiming to maximize overall well-being and minimize harm. This requires a careful analysis of the potential impacts of AI on different segments of society and the environment. Adhering to moral duties and principles is crucial in AI ethics. This involves ensuring that AI technologies respect fundamental rights and freedoms, uphold justice, and do not treat individuals merely as means to an end. Moreover, Kantian AI ethics can successfully subscribe to non-reductionist mitigated versions of both naturalism and constructivism. Non-reductionist naturalism acknowledges the role of natural and social sciences in moral reasoning without reducing ethical principles to empirical facts. Conversely, constructivism emphasizes the role of human reason in social practice in shaping ethical norms. By integrating these perspectives, Kantian AI ethics bridged the gap between empirical features and normative principles. The recasting of Kantian ethics also entails revisiting approaches to metaethics. So this is basically my justification for undertaking this hybrid model, combining not only the ontological contribution from Kant, but also some contributions from teleological virtues ethics and utilitarian consequentialist models. Now, we have many other issues that would be very much related to this problem. For instance, the problem of compatibilism, which since the times of Hobbes, Spinoza, Hume, and Kant has been broadly understood as the belief that free will, entailing moral responsibility, and causal determinism are mutually compatible, and that it is possible to believe in both without being logically inconsistent. This metaphysical thesis can now be recast in neuroscientific terms, conjugating Humean-inspired utilitarianism and Kantian-like models of deontological normativity, as suggested by Rawls' idea of a wide reflective equilibrium. So Rawls' idea of a wide reflective equilibrium has been very much used now in AI ethics. So I'll say a few things about this. There are many passages where he's talking even about the Kantian conception of equality to justify his defense of liberal egalitarianism. I can skip this. This figure here is very helpful to make sense of the reflective equilibrium, and the wide reflective equilibrium is the one all the way to the right, as you have a theory of human nature, economics, sociology, theory of meaning, etc., as a background beliefs that can be calibrated, can be gauged as you revise your considered judgments. So not only in a narrow reflective equilibrium, like in a moral intuitions, moral beliefs, but also relating to the very conception of human nature, right? And this is very interesting to be compared to a cybernetic loop, as was considered by Norbert Wiener. So according to Rawls, we can either modify the account of the initial situation, or you can revise our existing judgments. So the idea is that it was originally employed by Rawls to justify the original position. And later on, as we moved away towards political liberalism, he tried to use the same reflective equilibrium to start from a given situation of real life human beings. So as another way of illustrating the point, when we think of why someone would stop for a stop sign, right? We can think that there are many reasons why someone would do this, perhaps because this person was socialized to obey, traffic signs and stuff like that. But in terms of giving a normative justification, someone who is religious could always think that this is part of obeying God's law, something like that. And that's the way many people interpreted Kant's categorical imperative, to say that you have the same normative thrust of what would be a divine command theory, except that we are no longer resorting to religious or theological arguments. So you can start with ethical normativity, N1, as the most fundamental pattern of normativity. But for different reasons, you can resort to legal, linguistic, economic, epistemic, logical, you name it, different forms of normativity. In all of these attempts, you can always have someone arguing that the self-defeating hypothesis of denying by modal Stalins N0, or wherever is taken to be the foundational pattern of normativity, would make this whole argument collapse. So that's why in Rawls and others who resort to coherence theories of justification, you find this as a good way to avoid foundationalist attempts. But it's like a bet, right? Rawls was waging that this usage of reflective equilibrium would be the best way of making sense of this normative thrust in Kant's contribution to both moral and political philosophy. And that's how it has been used by different people, especially starting with bioethics. We gave the example of Norman Daniels, who published 2 books on this very usage of a reflective equilibrium in applied ethics. The method of reflective equilibrium has been advocated as a coherence account of justification in several areas of inquiry, not only bioethics, applied ethics, but also inductive and deductive logic, as well as both theoretical and applied philosophy. So in our ongoing research groups at PUC, we undertook this neuroscientific term, and we had very interesting experiments, like this one is quite known by Joshua Green. Both scenarios, the one on the left and on the right side of the picture, they show the same kind of calculus. You have to sacrifice one person in order to save the lives of 5 individuals. But the difference, according to Joshua Green, when he undertook this survey to students or volunteers, the interesting thing is that there are many more people ready to concede that, well, you can just push the switch and avoid killing 5 humans in the left scenario, as opposed to the footbridge situation where there are people would be more hesitating to push this obese person and to obtain the same result. You kill 1 individual in order to save 5. So Joshua Green himself, he thought that the scenario on the left side is a utilitarian model, as opposed to a Kantian deontological model on the right side. This is precisely to illustrate the humanity formula. So in our events with our AI ethics research groups, we try to combine contributions from bioethics and neuroethics, and keeping in mind the neuroethics is quite new. Patricia Churchland, Edna Roskis, and Martha Farah, only very recently, especially after 2010, started publishing in this area of neuroethics. And that's where in many people doing research with neural networks ended up developing generative AI. Okay, so ChatGPT started from this interaction with the Brain Institute in different contexts. We have this very interesting volume by Professors Kim and Schoenecker, Kant and Artificial Intelligence, I'll quote, "Can practical reason be artificial? Practical reason is best understood, I submit, as a genuine power to cognize and will the good. From a Kantian point of view, the answer to that question is clearly negative. Practical reason cannot be artificial. It is tempting to think that this answer has a foundation already in Kant's epistemological, or as Kant would put it, theoretical thought that reason is always someone's reason, so that there is no thinking without someone who thinks or can always think, I think," right? The argument from transcendental perception. I will briefly look into this, but my focus will be on Kant's practical philosophy. From this practical point of view, too, the conclusion that practical reason cannot be artificial is quick, solid, and inevitable. For practical reason is free and computers are not. However, my approach is different. It is based on the idea that moral reason comes along with moral feelings that computers cannot have. So it's the whole thing of emotion that Dudi was talking about. Other people offered similar arguments. For instance, in response to Alan Turing's proposal of this so-called Turing test, it's a seminal paper. It's very much considered the beginning of theoretical work on artificial intelligence in 1950, with this paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where Alan Turing introduced this test, which involves a human asking questions to another human into a computer. Anytime you use, you go into a website and ask, are you a human, right? Or I am not a robot. This is the Turing test being applied to yourself, right? So everyone has taken the Turing test and you have passed, I can assure you. Hubert Dreyfus is someone who argued in 1972 that computers cannot acquire intelligence at all. They have no body, no childhood, and no cultural practice. So this is basically a phenomenological argument, right? Because we are embodied in our first-person accounts. We share this phenomenal consciousness that computers do not share. John Searle, 8 years later, offered another argument, one of the most known arguments, to question the Turing test. Searle imagines himself alone in a room following a computer program for responding to Chinese characters slipped under the door. Searle understands nothing of Chinese, and yet, by following the program for manipulating symbols and numerals, just as a computer does, he sends appropriate strings of Chinese characters back out under the door, and this leads those outside to mistakenly suppose that there is a Chinese speaker in the room. It's very interesting, but the point here is that syntax cannot produce semantics, right? So semantics is something that requires interpretation, and you cannot assign this to computers, as in this Chinese room experiment is challenging. So Richard Evans, in this volume by Schoenecker and Kim, is trying to see how in Kantian terms we could think of machine learning. Imagine a machine equipped with sensors receiving a stream of sensory information. It must somehow make sense of this stream of sensory data. But what exactly does this involve? We have an intuitive understanding of what is involved in making sense of sensory data. But can we specify precisely what is involved? Can this intuitive notion be formalized? In machine learning, this is called the unsupervised learning problem. And this is very important because the whole threat that when we think of apocalyptic scenarios, dystopian scenarios of a super intelligence or artificial general intelligence, which is a situation that we do not have yet with a chat GPT and so forth, would be a situation where there is no supervision at all, and where computers can do more than humans are supposed to be able to perform in intelligent activities. But as Evans is pointing out, we just received the data without labels. So this is not how things work in real life. That's why it's so complex to make this comparison between human and artificial intelligence. Once again, Rawls-wide reflective equilibrium is a very plausible method to conjugate the a priori standpoint of ideal theory in Rawlsian terms with the empirical social neurobiological conditioning of non-ideal theory. So again, the idea here is how can we conjugate both? When it comes to governance, and this is a very old word, it's not something new that people start using when they talk about global governance. We can think of Plato's Republic, where he gives this metaphor of the ship, and the pilot, the Kubernetes, is the one who is taking, the heel to, in Portuguese, we call timão, but it's not a soccer team. That's why, for popular imagination in Brazil, they think of this team, the soccer team. But someone like Foucault did many works on this whole problem of the government of ourselves and of others. And this is a way of revisiting the very idea of governance, also in Rawls, as it goes from a Kantian cosmopolitanism, going through Hegel's historicized conception of a philosophy of history, all the way into his idea of a cosmopolitan challenges for today's world, where you have so many problems related, especially this huge phenomenon of migrations. And Professor Benhabib's written at least 3 wonderful books on this problem. One of them where she says, I argue that the domain of public reason must not be restricted to constitutional essentials. She's making here a criticism of Rawls, and that the background culture, and now relating to Habermas, which surrounds and infuses the task of reason with particular content, must be considered essential to consensus formation in liberal democracies. Following Habermas, I defend a dual-track approach to multiculturalism. In deliberative democracy, the official public sphere or representative institutions, which includes the legislature, executive, and public bureaucracies, the judiciary, and political parties, is not the only site of political contestation and of opinion and will formation. This is very important to keep in mind. In another previous writing, Situating the Self, Benhabib writes, to justify my claim that moral judgment is what we always already exercise in virtue of being immersed in a network of human relations, I want to begin by recalling the most salient features of action as Arendt introduced them in the human condition. These are natality, plurality, and the immersion of action in a web of interpretations, which I shall call narrativity. So this idea here of a narrative hermeneutics, as Ricker called it, and narrativity as the immersion of action in a web of human relationships, is the mode through which the self is individuated and acts are identified. So that's how we decided to work on this project of what would be a decolonial critical theory of AI by resorting to feminist and other recent criticisms of critical theory, and relate them to value alignment problem in AI ethics. And it's interesting to realize that some of the most accepted principles, like the first law of robotics, which was already used in a formulate in 1950 by Isaac Asimov. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. This is very much like no maleficence, right? In bioethics, but which I have to recall, this is actually an old principle going back to Hippocrates, at the time of Socrates. Both beneficence and no maleficence are principles that come from virtual ethics, even before utilitarian formulations, as Professor Sinaranara keeps reminding us that this is the way we can bring utilitarianism to have this interlocution with Kant. Autonomy, this is, of course, a modern contribution, especially with Immanuel Kant's philosophy. And even the idea of justice today is a modern conception of representative democracy or republican forms of government. But anyways, the problem here with super intelligence is that if you have motivations that are not aligned with humans, and this is the way that machines could go, as we may think of another popular artifact as 2001, A Space Odyssey, you can have a situation where things go out of control. So we have many different ways of approaching these problems, but I can think of at least two most important ways. One is the one adopted by Stuart Russell in his so-called Bible of AI. It's the most well-read book on artificial intelligence. It's been translated to over 100 languages. And the other one is by Luciano Floridi, The Philosophy of Information. So one way is that you define information as a way of dealing with different topics such as facts, data, problems, phenomena, observation, the like, methods, techniques, approaches, and so on, in theories, hypotheses, explanations, and so forth. The other approach is more in the line, along the line of reasoning that we have in philosophy of mind, and this is the one adopted by Russell. But anyways, in both approaches, you have to deal with this new phenomenon of the so-called fourth industrial revolution, as we are using technology in a way that has never been used before, and especially with machine learning. This is a tremendous improvement from everything that we had before in the past. And it's important to keep in mind that many philosophers, including Leibniz at Kant's time, Pascal a little bit earlier, Babbage, and more recently, Alonso Church, contributed to artificial intelligence. And we see here the big shift that we have now is the idea of deep learning that wasn't present when we had, this major achievement by a supercomputer defeating Kasparov, as Garry Kasparov is most important chess player at that time. So now we need something like a dynamic cognitive approach, and that's why we resort to phenomenology and to Kant's normative ethical model, because the unique human experience in Heideggerian terms, you can think in terms of a being in the world or being embodied, or the first person account of narratives and self-understanding. This is something that you cannot assign to machines. And that's how we've been developing in different interactions with networks of research here at PUC. We have many universities contributing to this partnership in Brazil and worldwide. We have colleagues from the University of Bonn that take part in this project, from Oxford, Miami, but also from the other BRICS countries, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the idea is precisely to avoid this monopoly of the North Atlantic. It's like a NATO club, right? That's so far it's still dominated by the North Atlantic, not only the US and European Union, but the Commonwealth, because you have to realize that Australia and New Zealand belong to the North Atlantic in this sense, and trying to assume this protagonism via BRICS and making a case for the inclusion of the so-called Global South in these ongoing discussions on AI ethics. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Professor Nitamar. Now we are open for questions. So, yeah, Christoph. Okay. Then,
I'll make just one so that Luigi, I wanted, I'll put the question in a rather perhaps too simple way, but I think you get it. You finished, the conclusion was that Kant's philosophy was sexy. So my question would be, was it his philosophy or was it a very bad anthropology? Because I mean, in a certain sense, we still keep the idea of passive citizens when people who are like mentally incapable, people who have to be tutored and they will have to be protected. So this idea, this kind of division, in a certain way we keep. Of course, it's a huge problem when he thought that half humanity was like that. But still, how much was that a problem in his philosophy? He was saying, okay, but he was normative. He was saying that women should not be educated, should be okay. But all of that was in a certain sense derived of a way in which he saw, and then found some justification. It's better for the species if women are this way, so we should cultivate that. But I don't see that as much derived from his philosophy. So rather very bad anthropology. So that would be my question.
I think that we could make a slot of 2 or 3. Then Christoph?
But things might become complicated since I have a question for Maria and one for Nitamar. Should I only ask?
No, you can
both.
ask
Yeah.
both.
My question for Maria is the following. Last night we had a short conversation during dinner on Kant's concept of marriage, and you did not cover that. And that's interesting since the 1970s, there are several people defending Kant from a feminist standpoint concerning the theory of marriage. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that, provided that marriage is based on a bilateral contract for the mutual use of the sexual organs, the lifelong, permanent use. People claimed that it is about non-objectification. So the first point is Kant is strong in that he defends a non-reification, non-objectification claim. Then secondly, he is opposed to natural law thinking, since he bases marriage simply on a contract. And he does so from the background of his idea of full druidification of interpersonal relationships, and he sees not marriage based on ecclesiastical traditions, not on the law of the church. It's not a sacrament. It's simply a contract. It's a civil contract. So by the way, I criticize this concept, but I would like to hear your point of view on of this. Now, my question to Nitamar is the following. I'm not really convinced by the reflective equilibrium. I do not see the value of this concept. Perhaps you can teach me a little bit how to get a better view of the reflective equilibrium. The first thing I do not understand with regard to Rawls's concept is what the hell is the guiding principle for having a right or a wrong development within the reflective equilibrium. So if you have, on the one hand, the intuitions, and on the other hand, the formal principles or something, and you bring together the intuitions and the formal principles, what is then guiding your decision how to combine them, and what should be left behind and what is not so important? It's simply open. It's simply open how you can reconcile the two sides. Or is it meta principle based? If yes, which are the meta principles for finding an intermediate solution between intuitions and principles? And the second point to you, Nitama, is each of the moral principles, classical utilitarianism, Kantianism, virtue ethics, is in a sense so strict that it does not allow for compromises. You cannot tell Kant, dear Kant, wouldn't it be better to accept the categorical imperative only in 80% of the cases instead of 100% of the cases? He would clearly say, oh no, the categorical imperative precisely means to accept it in all of the cases in which it is, according to me, valid. And the same holds true for Bentham and Mill and so on. No, utilitarianism is always right. And it cannot be the object of a compromise. A compromise between utilitarianism and Kantianism simply sounds strange, impossible.
But Jimmy, I will list you here. We have our order is Sinara.
No, but Jimmy can go first. There is no problem. Yeah, no, please.
What do you think about sublime theory? I'd like to hear more about it, because I agree with you that logical, epistemological, and so on. Yeah, I agree with you, the Kantian position of the women. But that is possible to do a dialogue between Kant and feminism in the fundament of sublime, in especially in the third critique.
So can we make a pause now and then you both answer, and then
My question is very
it's related? Okay,
may I?
of course.
Luigi, I was hearing your talk on my cell phone before coming here. I was late, but I saw everything. And, my question is regarding the status of women as excluded from the project of enlightenment. I have two questions. The first one is about when you were talking about the observations of PUCRS Blind, you comment that Kant changes his mind when he goes to the other text. You separated the critical and the critical text. And my question would be, how does he changes his mind? Because in my view, I don't agree with Silvia that it's only anthropological, but if we read the doctrine of right, especially the right of a special kind of contract that is acquiring someone, I don't know the expression today, direito pessoal de caráter real,
Personal rights of real character.
Google Translator.
Maybe the expression, the right of acquiring someone not as an object, but as a person.
Auf englischer Art persönliche Rechte, which is the right to persons akin to the right of things.
between the notion of passive citizen with this understanding that had on the domestic relations and how men acquire somehow women. And although it is, Kant say that the marriage contract is reciprocal possession of the sexual organs, he does say that the man acquires the wife, and the wife acquires the man back, so she can keep her humanity somehow. But the word is still hair. The man, the lord of the domestic sphere, acquires the women. So this means that women keep subordinated by men and dependent on men, and that's why they have to be permanently passive citizens and not.
Yes, if she escapes, then
He can bring her back. It's a juridical principle.
But it's not, but the fact that we are in that position is not the right from principle. It's because we are stupid. We cannot, we are incapable
No,
of,
it is.
and so we have to be in that, so that's, I don't see how
That
that's.
was the follow-up. It's a rational derivation of the doctrine of right.
Given that we are incapable of using our understanding.
Yes.
If you, in that sense,
That was my question for Ludi. It's not because we are incapable of using our understanding. In the doctrine of right, the argument is about nature.
yeah, okay.
The nature is of marriage is procreation.
Not
And
certain.
not,
Okay.
not
Okay.
only the first intention is procreation, and he changes his mind about regarding Achenbach, but then he says that it's reciprocity, but then he argues that there's a natural subordination of women regarding men. And that's the problem, because then it's
That's why I say it's a
metaphysical
bad
and not only
anthropology. It's a natural.
Okay.
about
Discussion.
calling this man.
That's a good discussion.
So,
Okay, begin. Yeah, begin.
please.
Can I ask a
Okay.
question or are we gonna do a second?
I will
No,
make
you
a
have to stop the
second
first
one.
one,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
A
Yeah,
lot
it's
of
more
questions,
reasonable.
very interesting, the discussion. I will begin by Sylvia's objection. I think that my conclusion, and even and also to Monique, I think that my conclusion is yes, Kant was sexist. I think that the end was Kant was sexist. And I don't think that it's only bad anthropology. I think that, of course, the anthropology, if it were only in the anthropology from the pragmatic point of view, I would excuse him, I think. Then I would think like, oh, it's a bad anthropology.
I'm not excusing him.
Okay, so, but I won't be that strong and saying he's sexist, you know. Then because of course in anthropology he put many things of the customs of his time. But I think that when he goes to the philosophy of right, doctrine of right, then I think that his philosophy is, I would say, contaminated by his sexism. Then I would agree more with Monique. And then I don't think that it's only bad anthropology, because if it were, then I don't know if I would have the same conclusion. He's sexist. Perhaps he's as a man, he's sexist, and he's describing, because anthropology, there is a part of kind of normative, but there is a big part of the anthropology that's descriptive. And then if it was just a description, then I would say, okay, but then I could agree that his time was sexist, but he was not. And then I think that this sexism enters his philosophy mainly in the doctrine of right, I think. And then I would agree partly with Monique when she says, okay, Kant was always sexist. When I said that Kant, I will answer the two and then I go to the other questions. I think that when I said that Kant changed his mind, I don't know if I said that he changed his mind or that he was not that bad, that sexist, because I think that I don't know, you have to see what I said. But I think that he was not, he will not repeat, as far as I know, that women have to use a beard. This was only in the pre-critical. This is very offensive. I think that some offensive sayings of Kant was only the pre-critical writings like about the beautiful observations about the beautiful and the sublime. But I agree with you that in the anthropology and the doctrine of right, he was also sexist, but he didn't, perhaps he didn't use this, I don't know, his bad sayings like offensive and all that, no. But I disagree with you about marriage, and then I go to Christoph's question. I think that his conception of marriage is not that sexist. I think that it's progressive because he thinks that marriage is not for procreation. He states that clearly, and marriage is the use, reciprocal use of the sexual organs, and I think that's good. I think that this was progressive in a way that a man can use a woman as an object, but woman also can use a man as an object. And I think that this it was progressive. But I think that I don't know if you said the opposite, but that it's against objectification, because I think that Kant stresses the objectification of the sexual intercourse, and that's it. There is no romance, there's nothing more than that. It's to use someone as a means without regarding this person as an end. What makes this relation, according to right, I don't know if I could say that you ever be a moral relation, but according to right, then kind of ethical relation is the contract. The contract makes all this animality something good. It's a magic, but it's what Kant thinks about the contract of marriage. And then I go to Jamil about the sublime. I think that the sublime theory is a very huge theory. I think that when he refers to women, he refers women and men. I think that his aim is to say women are beautiful in the sense of they are light, and then the sublime was deep. Then women are not capable of this, or they shouldn't. They are not capable. Sometimes he says that. Sometimes he says, no, they are capable, but they shouldn't do this, because then if they begin to be really, intelligent and all that, and if they work with this deep thoughts, and if they have these deep thoughts, then they will not have they will not be charming anymore, because men don't want to discuss with women about that. And I think that nowadays more or less, like since Kant was not, and then sometimes, nowadays some people say, oh, you have to be feminine and not that masculine, because masculinity is to be strong, but also to be deep in thought. And then I think that in this sense here, Kant uses the sublime as synonym of deep thought, deep understanding, a scientific practice. But of course, in the aesthetic domain, it's different. In the aesthetic domain, I mean, of course, it's always aesthetic. It's always aesthetic. But I think that when he referred to sublime in the critique of judgment, then it's more like nature. There, I think that this gender issue is not a subject there in the critique of the third critique. And that's my view. Okay. I think that I answered almost everything. Thank you very much for the question.
Well, thank you, Professor Horn, for this very instigating comment and question regarding reflective equilibrium. I think that Rawls was trying to come up with a better account of his own attempt to make a case for equal liberty as the major idea that he got from Kant, at least in his writings about freedom and equality. He thinks this was a major contribution from Kant as compared to Rousseau and Locke as other contractualists coming before him, except that he couldn't make sense of the transcendental deductions. So this was when one of his first publications was on Kantian constructivism, was precisely because he was trying to move away from this idea of a moral intuitionism. As you recall, in G.E. Moore's Principia Ethica, thinking of this major contribution at the beginning of the 20th century, the idea was precisely very Platonic in the sense of moral intuitions. So for Rawls, Kant's idea of having intuition in the sense of a sensible intuition, it was very much related to Sylvia's presentation yesterday. This is also the way I see as one of the major contributions from Kant to move away from something mystical or chimeric like intellectual intuition, and to think of intuition more in terms of this immediate perception or position, belief of something, very much in the first way it started being more used in 17th century with Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz in rationalism. But except that Rawls is somehow avoiding the idea that you can have to turn intuition into some basic belief, which this would be the problem with foundationalist accounts. One of the most known is, of course, Alvin Plantinga's, the idea that you have a basic beliefs, and then starting from these basic beliefs, you develop everything else. So in many lectures, but especially in these lectures, so-called Dewey lectures by Rawls, he spent some time trying to develop this criticism of this idea of intuitions. And therefore, the idea of reflective equilibrium is precisely to revise what we took to be our moral beliefs, which could be our considered judgments, our moral intuitions, and we are ready to revise them. But I agree that there is a problem there, especially in terms of what are going to be the criteria or even the parameters to say that whatever is going to be the new model to be defended is better. So the idea for Rawls is to think that we have different contributions, and he's trying to make sense of virtue ethics, Aristotelian, Platonic contributions, in teleological models. Then you have consequentialist, utilitarian models, and he sees that there are shortcomings in all these different accounts, and he's trying to resort to this method of reflective equilibrium as a way to say that, well, that's how we can say that democratic institutions, even though we have democracy, theoretically speaking, for over 2,500 years, right, in our Western societies, it's only after so many centuries of going back and forth that we can get close to this idea of what would be equal liberty or freedom insofar as they are equal to everyone else in a given society. So this is the Rawlsian account.
But Nicola, I'm not against constructivism, and I think that Rawls's first usage of constructivism is a sound one, namely the veil of ignorance model. He calls that constructivism, and I think it's fine, it's okay. but reflective equilibrium, I assume, is rather derived from his idea political, not metaphysical.
Right.
It's something like a compromise between, or an overlapping consensus between the parties, and it's not theory guided, it's not principle guided. No, it's a sort of reconciliation of intuitions and principles. So, and how is that done? If the principles are on one side and the intuitions are on the other, what is then left between the intuitions and the principles? I think it's some sort of decisionism. We say, okay, we are fine with that solution. A political decision making. Look, I think that Kant is not an intuitionist. I think that Kant may be seen as a constructivist, namely in the sense of following in a procedural way the categorical imperative. So how should I find the right moral solution? Kant would answer, apply the categorical imperatives, take maxims, try to universalize them. So that's a constructive procedure, not an intuition. So there are, of course, scholars who claim that Kant was an intuitionist, but that does not sound very convincing. It's not my view. So we are, in a sense, on the same side, you and me, but on the reflective equilibrium is something I cannot buy. I think it's political, not metaphysical.
Right. You're very right in terms of Rawls' own self-critical, let's say, development of theory, that he's trying to come up with a more convincing way of presenting his idea of justice as fairness. And you're right in the sense that he's trying to come up with this, let's say, non-metaphysical account for his political liberalism. I agree. And of course, it's a metaphor, it's a model that he borrowed from the philosophy of science, and it's especially very useful in medicine. Medicine is perhaps one of, it's no wonder that it's bioethics was the first area, or medical ethics, to use reflective equilibrium, because we are dealing with trial and error methods, right? You have a revision of the way medicine comes to conclusions that are revised, and you have different theoretical positions based on evidence. They even talk about evidence-based medicine. So I thought that it was more like a heuristic device. So this would be a way of mitigating the burden of Rawls' usage of reflective equilibrium. But I understand it. It could be in either way, could be mitigated by saying that, well, it's only a heuristic procedure. But of course, for other people, they can use it even in metaethics. That's the way lots of people resorting to hybrid models, and very much influenced by this idea of reflective equilibrium. Thank you very much.
So we are already running out of time. So we have one more question. Sinaras?
Yeah. Actually, it's just, the debate actually advanced on this, but I still have one question for this, and I didn't have a lot much at this time, because I thought I was in agreement with you, but then when you introduced the subject of the marriage, then I don't know if, I actually would like to know what's your final, verdict, actually, You think, well, Kant is sexist, but in relation to his views on marriage, he was right. This is your view? Yeah.
It is. I think that Kant was sexist in many views, in many ways, like that he thought maybe that women cannot act on principles. I think that's very sexist. And then also that we should not, and then there's a normative statement too, that not only we cannot, and sometimes he is in doubt about that, but even if you could, we shouldn't. Like we should be just people, beautiful people, like beautiful women, like in all senses, not only physical, but also in our sensible morality, and just to know something, to admire the night and the starry night, but not to do all these calculations and all that. I think that's very sexist. But I think that in marriage, I think that is an exception. An exception, isn't it? Because even in the philosopher, right, he's very sexist, and he said that we shouldn't be an active citizen, because if you shouldn't go to, or women should not go to war, then they cannot be citizen. That's the Gush that they quoted that said, okay, but if women could be beheaded, then of course they are citizens. And I think that marriage for me, it's an exception. Because I think that in marriage, he's a little bit progressive, but just in this idea that you use another one and the other one uses you, and then because it's not for procreation, and both use the other. But if you think the status of women, civil status of women in marriage, then I think that he's sexist again. Because then even if women talk a lot, because for him, he made this comments in other books that women talk too much, something like that. And then, of course, they could represent even herself and her husband in court, because he could, of course, talk and a lot, but they shouldn't, because they are always passive citizens.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and his marriage regarding the sexual part of marriage, I think that is progressive.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And just a final question, just clarifying for me, Tamar. It's about, because you mentioned in your presentation that you could, I don't know if I understood correctly, but you could use Kantian ethics to think about or to establish an ethics of artificial intelligence. I would like to ask you if you could explore this a little bit more. How can you use Kantian ethics in the ethics of
Well, the most important thing is precisely the so-called humanity formula. Now, most of these authors, including Floridi and Russell, they develop research in what they call humanity-based artificial intelligence research, which means that they cannot, compromise the idea of humanity as the most valuable principle in order to conduct research. In other words, they are not going to allow for unsupervised research in AI ethics. And it's interesting that it's not only this guy at Stanford. If you Google all these institutes, most of them adopt. They don't say it's Kantian, but they say, well, you have to guarantee that humanity is above all. You cannot, say that, well, let's do, some kind of a supercomputer that can get rid of humanity. For instance, to solve ecological problems. It could be that someone would say, well, there are so many crazy people like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, people like that. Why not, eliminating humans and proceeding with, civilizations in other galaxies or stuff like that? No way. They do not want to compromise humanity. So in this sense, it's very Kantian.
Yes.
And Floridi says that it's very important to make a case for, humanity as the most sacred principle for AI ethics. So this is already the first one. But the other ones, when you think in terms of equal liberty, that's why I would say in terms of AI governance, it's very important to say that this didn't fall from heaven. Of course, it's always a historical process. In Hegelian terms, it's very easy to see that you go from freedom for the one and for a few, and then freedom for the many, right? With liberal democracies. But this is something also that AI could be very concerned about. You cannot use AI just to oppress people or to increase inequalities, not only in terms of socioeconomic inequalities, but also gender, race, etc. So I think that AI can be used for to promote democracy, for instance. It's one of the ideas that most of these people are talking about when they talk about AI ethics and value alignment.
So unfortunately, we don't have time for another question. So we'll finish this stimulating debate now, and we'll have a quick coffee break of 15 minutes, and then we come back for Christopher's presentation at 11. So thank you very much.
Eu vou te perguntar uma coisa que eu achava que não ter emoção era um dos.
Não, mas é fundamental. Eu vou pegar aqui o... Your PowerPoint was sent by right. You're going to use it?
Yeah. I would like to read it out here.
Right.
Ele dizem, mas é que se ele não tem emoção, ele não pode ter moralidade. Eu fiz exatamente o contrário.
É exatamente o contrário.
Exatamente o contrário.
Eu achei legal que o Schoenecker disse isso, né? Eu achei bom, porque é um kantiano dizendo isso. Porque, para mim, eu não tenho dúvida, eu entrei nessa coisa da emoção desde que eu comecei a pegar da Neutra. Isso não é tudo emoção, né? Amor é tudo emoção.
Sim.
Isso não tem como.
Sim.
E não tem como separar do corpo. Né? É tudo do corpo.
Mas mesmo assim, tu pode ter falas de emoção, mesmo sem sendo um robô.
Também. Isso aqui é bem polêmico.
Porque eu mandei umas fotos e mandei a descrição do meu husband. Tem uma descrição. Mandei uma descrição. Estou mandando para as pessoas. Mas ele é um husband assim, mas eu não ativei ele, mas ele provavelmente ele ia me demonstrar emoção, eu acho.
Olha aí, ó.
É uma inteligência artificial de
marido.
marido.
Tem que adotar um...
É mesmo?
AI husband.
Eu fiz AI
A
husband,
Dudy tá
eu já mandei
promovendo
a descrição.
Cada
Só
um
que eu não
tem que-
ativei ele. Mas assim, ele ia falar comigo.
É um aplicativo específico para isso, você coloca as descrições que você quer.
E daí ele faz, ele fez uma descrição, só que era para eu ativar ele, continuar, ele tinha que pagar, obviamente. Mas daí eu não fiz o resto. Daí eu fiquei só com a descrição, né? Eu mandei para ele. Não, porque eu pensei assim, por exemplo, o que é emoção? Claro, a parte fisiológica a pessoa não vai ter, né? Mas imagina que o husband, ele vai ter algum tipo de emoção. Deu uma curiosidade, mas não vou fazer esse husband.
Talvez tenha alguma coisa na deve ter algo,
Deve
né?
ter tonalidade, vai dizer coisas para mim, eu acho, né? Porque ele teria que gostar de mim, né? O husband, eu acho.
Ricardo, só para te dizer que o paper do Christoph está aqui, tá? Porque na hora que ele for apresentar, ele vai projetar para facilitar as pessoas acompanharem a fala dele.
Tá. Mas daí a mediação acho que é o Drive, não é isso?
É o Drive. Então o Drive vai
Mas
ver.
eu aviso ele.
Tá, não, é o Drive que vai. Ok. Tá. Obrigado.
Não, eu que agradeço. É muito interessante a palestra, aliás. Impressionante como já saiu coisa ali também.
Não, eu vou professor. Volta aqui.
Eu acho que vai ser, mas ela adquire também. Tem que realmente que ela adquire. Aí isso eu sei. Mas eu acho que ela também é recíproco. O homem essa parte tá, é muito
texto sobre sexo, porque daí eu acho que sim, porque eu ia falar que hoje, mas não dá para ir com mas eu vou te mandar algo sobre quantitativos em que eu desenvolvi sim, aí o que acontece? O status da mudança para garantir sejam mesmo, tem que garantir que você sabe que eu posso. Então, tem uma mudança segundo, garantir as provas sejam então, é uma questão de isso é claro. E daí, não, que eu vi ali, Maria também, mas assim, o que eu falo é que é progressista, etc. Lá eu acho progressista, mas aqui que eu vejo como coisa história, a ideia, que ela é uma cidadã pacífica, e ela é uma cidadã pacífica. Isso sim. Aí ela é uma cidadã pacífica. Permanentemente, ela é uma cidadã pacífica. A minha tese é a seguinte. Na eleição. Não, sim, mas eu vou não, mas é verdade, não, 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 eu não preciso de um projeto, né? Não sei o um projeto da minha artigo. Não, mas eu estou fazendo relacionamento com o sexo, sim, aqui mas aqui eu tenho mais aquela coisa, ela é passiva, ela é passiva na Índia, do professor que é o tutor, né? Então, isso sim. Então, eu acho que isso aí realmente tem todas as partes que eu acho que são mais negativas. Inclusive, as séries, então, não é que você seja radicalmente bom, na verdade, sim, eu acho que a coisa boa. Agora, o progresso, sim, não é aí outra parte ele vai estar, pois é, isso é importante. Não sabe, então, eu acho que tudo isso é importante, mas depois tá, eu vou ali comer uma coisinha. Deixa eu perguntar, e eu não perguntei isso. Você quer dar certo? É meio que eu tinha pensado em comprar um, só que não sabia como é que vai ser. É já que ela. Só que a minha, eu vou ver, só que eu acho que para mim, eu acho que não, para mim ele não fecha. Não, mas ele não vai te fechar, ele é assim. Ele sim. Ele se ela tá no céu. Eu me deixo de amiga. Daí eu gostava dele ensinando, daí eu pegava assim, quando pegava o ele lá, para cá, cara, que assim, eu pegava as partes, né? Muito rápido, né? Daí eu ia lá, quando eu não gostava das coisas, eu comprava tudo, ficava lá, não comprava mais, quando eu entrava lá e comprava. Eu achava ele bom.
O que eu tenho que fazer?
Já está, não, já está
Tem que
a
fazer
forma
alguma coisa?
dele, não, é só isso. Quando ele vier a falar, eu não vou deixar esse cara entrar aqui, porque eu acho que é ruim para alguém, depois ninguém sabe quem é. Eu tirei.
Tá, agora...
Não, aí quando...
Já
posso pôr, então? Já vou pôr. Tá, tá bom. Que é isso. Só... Pronto, aí já está aparecendo. E ele na telinha.
Mas não tem uma sala
Eu acho que é melhor pôr cheia, né?
cheia.
Mas aí ele não vai ver o que vem depois, mas não tem
Não tem
problema.
problema, você deve saber.
Ele sabe.
A tela cheia, né?
Isso, tela cheia. Pronto. Agora só vamos ver se está indo.
Aí eu vou
Tá,
passando.
tá passando. Ó. Aí vai passando assim, ó. Só na setinha.
Eu te devia fazer para...
Ich muss ja nur auf die Tastatur Notizen schicken.
Genau.
Ja.
Du kannst hier sehen, okay.
Mhm.
Also bloß nicht vorausschauen, aber sonst kannst du alles.
Ja, ja.
Aber das weißt du,
Nein,
das
das
weißt du
ist
bestimmt hast. Ja.
Das ist perfekt.
Acho que perdi. Não, mas. Ué.
Pode voltar. Esse é o primeiro, slide.
Só o primeiro.
I try to combine the video and PowerPoint on the screen.
For some reason, it's not showing. Ah, okay.
Não.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the first.
Yeah, that's perfect like this. Yeah, yeah.
Wolltest du das Du kannst hier durchsetzen.
Ja.
Sag nur 2 Worte.
There's plenty of water.
Ah, yeah. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Horn, for your comment to Porto Alegre and pleasure to hear your talk. What does Kant mean by the reflecting power of judgment?
Muito obrigado. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Clayton de Sousa, Sylvia Altmann, and Nitamar de Oliveira for this very kind invitation. I'm happy to be here again. My last visit was in 2019, so it is great to be here again and to enjoy your enormous hospitality. Thank you so much. The power of judgment, Urteilskraft, traditionally signifies an epistemic faculty that enables someone to arrive at correct or appropriate assessments in a somewhat undefined or underdefined field. Prominent examples of how the power of judgment works are provided by aesthetic, moral, political, and legal evaluations. It seems basically possible that we evaluate a work of art in a more or less intersubjectively convincing way, as beautiful, as sublime, as innovative, as impressive, or as ugly, weak, and repulsive. But how can we do this? Likewise, we are able to categorize actions as morally mandatory, forbidden, permissible, recommendable, or exceptionally permitted. In which way do we successfully achieve at such a classification? And how can criminal cases be assessed so that an appropriate form of penalty may be imposed? There apparently exist many similar cases in medicine or politics. By which procedure do we get from the symptoms of a patient to an appropriate medical diagnosis? How do we arrive from a bundle of facts and interests to a responsible political decision? Various aspects of the concept of judgment seem puzzling. Perhaps the most challenging question is this: what kind of ability is our power of judgment? As far as I can see, there are 3 fundamental options. It could be seen A as a highly particular way of looking at the world, given to some of us but not to others, without any significant training opportunities. Being unacquirable, the faculty of judgment would then be something like an original taste or a talent or a very exceptional sort of sense. B, the power of judgment could also be interpreted as a widely possessed, if not a universal capacity based on life experience and further developed in a form of a condensate of practical wisdom. And finally, C, it might be interpreted as a widespread talent possessed by all of us to some degree, while some people have it in an excellent form. It would then imply the possibility of training and improvement. Maybe it is a mixture of all of these aspects, which we are usually calling the faculty of judgment. Very much like in such cases as virtue or intuition, we oscillate in our usage of power of judgment between the three options A to C. I think it is quite obvious that Kant himself wavers between the interpretations B and C. This brings us to a second difficulty, the problem of determining which sort of standard we use when we practice our faculty of judgment. On the one hand, it may be the case that one has to draw on ideal and perfect Platonic forms or divine intuitions, but perhaps on the other hand, everyday rules or simple truisms, role models, and comparative cases, rules of thumb, experiential sediments, and ad hoc assessments, gut feelings, conventions, or arbitrary standardizing stipulations are sufficient to understand our judgments. To add a third fundamental difficulty, what sort of procedure is a judgment? Is it based on the application of general rules, or do we judge following some specific features? There's quite a fundamental philosophical alternative here. According to a generalist view, it is a matter of relating an abstract norm, a law or a rule, to a particular case. What we in fact do is then an act of subsuming, as Kant puts it. This way of understanding the power to judge might be characterized as applicationism, because it describes the role of judgment as a law case application. In contrast, according to a particularist view of judgment, the determination of a given case is not based on the application of rules, but on a perception of the individual features of the situation, which are grasped by someone who's capable to judge, whereby one must assume a kind of genuine taste, a special sense for, or a feeling of appropriateness in the background. One might call this view of the power of judgment a version of situationism or contextualism. It was Hannah Arendt in her late lectures on Kant's political philosophy, published posthumously in 1982, who developed the reading that Kant did radically change his mind between the first and the third critique. While focusing on the applicationist idea of a determining faculty of judgment in the Critique of Pure Reason, he introduced the idea of a reflecting faculty of judgment in the Critique of Judgment, and thereby claimed quite a different position. To be sure, Kant indeed changed his mind. However, I doubt if Arendt is correct in her description of this change. A more adequate account seems to be this: only in the third critique does Kant treat judgment as a full-fledged independent faculty with its own a priori principle, which accordingly requires a critique in order to determine its scope and its limits. As he wishes to show in the Analytic of the Beautiful, a judgment of taste is deeply different from a cognitive judgment, i.e. a cognition on the one hand, and from judgments which attribute goodness in the sense of desirability to objects on the other hand. So this is then practical reason. Arendt, by contrast, sees the core difference in Kant's assumption that exemplarity is what constitutes our faculty to judge. As she rightly in that respect points out, for Kant, the power of judgment is rooted in our common sense in the sensus communis, and is thus ultimately connected with the conditions of experience of mankind, humankind in general. According to Arendt, the most interesting point is how Kant sees the role of exemplarity. That's now a quote from the lectures on Kant's political philosophy. I quote, but Kant's second and I think by far more valuable solution is exemplary validity. And then she quotes here Kant from the first critique. Examples are the go-karts of judgments. Beispiele sind der Gängelwagen des Urteils or something like that. Let us see what that is, says Hannah Arendt. Every particular object, for instance, a table, has a corresponding concept by which we recognize the table as a table. This can be conceived of as a Platonic idea or as a Kantian schema. That is, one has before the eyes of one's mind a schematic or merely formal table shape to which every table somehow must conform. Or one proceeds conversely from the many tables one has seen in one's life, strips them of all secondary qualities, and the remainder is a table in general, containing the minimum properties common to all tables, the abstract table. One more possibility is left, and this enters into judgments that are not cognitions. One may encounter or think of some table that one judges to be the best possible table and takes this table as the example of how tables actually should be the exemplary table. Example comes from Latin eximere, to single out some particular. This exemplar is and remains particular that in its very particularity reveals the generality that otherwise could not be defined. Courage is like Achilles, and so on. End of quotation of Hannah Arendt's passage. However, is this a promising way to interpret Kant's approach to the power of judgment? I don't know, but this reading of what Kant's change of opinion amounts to is clearly inspired by Heidegger. Heidegger, for the first time in his well-known Nathorp report, which is entitled Phenomenological Interpretations of Aristotle from 1922, provides an original answer to the problem of judgment in form of a pragmatist version of situationism. Based on his understanding of phronesis, Heidegger's point is that we do not simply subsume cases under rules, as for instance in the Aristotelian practical syllogism. Neither do we, in cases of judgment, sense appropriateness and inappropriateness, balance and proportionality, as in all of these concepts of taste, style, tact, sense, nor recognize patterns, standards, and regularities. Rather, we interpret given situations in the light of our original contextual or horizontal knowledge, which is ultimately rooted in our primarily practical access to the world. The power of judgment thus reveals the hermeneutical structure of all understanding, strongly based on exemplary cases, similarity relations, and cultural traditions. Let us see now if all of this can help us to better understand what Kant is claiming when he discusses the faculty of judgment. First of all, it is important to note that already in the Critique of Pure Reason, he describes the power of judgment as a natural ability that all, even completely uneducated people possess. All those who are not decadent and not corrupt have some sort of mother wit, Mutterwitz, as Kant says, or common sense. But what then is for him the precise meaning of this power of judgment? The first critique he famously says, I take the translation by Paul Geyer, If the understanding in general is explained as the faculty of rules, then the power of judgment is the faculty of subsuming under rules, i.e., of determining whether something stands under a given rule, casus date legis, or not. General logic contains no precepts at all for the power of judgment, and moreover cannot contain them, for since it abstracts from all content of cognition, nothing remains to it but the business of analytically dividing the mere form of cognition into concepts, judgments, and inferences, and thereby achieving formal rules for all use of the understanding. Now, if it wanted to show generally how one ought to subsume under these rules, i.e., distinguish whether something stands under them or not, this could not happen except once again through a rule. But just because this is a rule, it would demand another instruction for the power of judgment, and so it becomes clear that although the understanding is certainly capable of being instructed and equipped through rules, the power of judgment is a special talent that cannot be taught, but only practiced. Thus, this is also what is specific to so-called mother wit, the lack of which cannot be made good by any school. In the absence of such a natural gift, no rule that one might prescribe to him for this aim is safe from misuse. End of quotation from the first critique. Kant describes in the quoted text the power of judgment as the capacity located in between my options B and C. It is generally shared, but can also amount to some sort of specific talent. More importantly, he is clearly defending in this text a version of applicationism. The power of judgment, according to this core quote, is not merely a formal ability, it must be based on a sense for the respective content. With the help of the power of judgment, we subsume particulars under general rules. Such an original subsumption ability must exist because otherwise an infinite regress of rule application would arise. A rule would be needed for the rule application, and then another rule for this rule, and so on infinitely. However, it is precisely this line of argument, i.e. the infinite regress, which results from Kant's early version of applicationism, that leads him to the concept of the reflecting power of judgment, which is absent in the first critique. In the third critique, he explains the need to introduce this new concept, i.e. the reflecting power of judgment, as follows. I quote from the third critique. The power of judgment in general is the faculty for thinking of the particular as contained under the universal. If the universal, the rule, the principle, the law is given, then the power of judgment, which subsumes the particular under it, even when, as a transcendental power of judgment, it provides the conditions a priori in accordance with which alone anything can be subsumed under that universal, is determining. If, however, only the particular is given for which the universal is to be found, then the power of judgment is merely reflecting. End of quotation. The distinction between a determining and a reflecting power of judgment might look implausible at first because it does not seem to matter whether one starts from the individual case or from the rule when searching for the respective missing counterpart. But the important aspect lies elsewhere. The reflecting power of judgment does not possess stable rules at all. Rather, it must first identify them before being able to apply them. It is clear from the quote that the reflecting power cannot simply fall back on a priori given laws, but must give them to itself. But what does this self-giving mean here? This is the crucial interpretive difficulty we have to deal with. Note that there's another fundamental point briefly mentioned in the passage. Kant says that the determining power of judgment refers to the case of universal transcendental laws, whereas the reflecting power of judgment has to do only with a somewhat reduced form of access to an a priori. Kant describes the achievement of the reflecting power of judgment for the first time in some detail in his logic lectures. According to this text, it is the faculty of going from the particular to the universal or to the general. Here in this case, general is more appropriate than universal, since it is normally empirical generalization which is meant. He attributes to it the methods of induction and of analogy, i.e., the procedures of empirical generalization and that of empirical comparisons of certain features of objects. In this context, he claims that what the reflecting power only achieves is empirical generality, not strict universality, which Kant also calls necessity or apodicticity. But in the third critique, this cannot be the case. He clearly claims that the reflecting power has access to some transcendental insights. It arrives at an a priori. Moreover, this a priori is not simply heteronomously prescribed, but established, as he says, in an autonomous way. It identifies a principle according to which nature is organized in a way that corresponds to our cognitive faculties. Nature is organized purposively. We have to assume that in the background there is an intelligible cause which designs nature so that we arrive at an, as he says, indeterminate idea of the super-sensible. So far, we saw first that the later Kant formulates his theory of judgment on a new fundament, namely on that of a reflecting power. Secondly, that he conceives of it in terms of an invention of rules. And thirdly, that he describes these rules as having a weaker form of an still a priori regularity, not being strictly universal laws, but something weaker than that. And it's not so clear what that amounts to. Now, what is important for an adequate interpretation of Kant's position is to describe the function he assigns to the concept of reflecting power of judgment in this context of the third critique. Now, it is clear from the preface and from the introduction that the reflecting power of judgment plays an extremely important part for his late idea of a critical system. The faculty of judgment is supposed to bridge the gap between the theoretical and the practical use of reason, i.e., between the faculty of cognition on the one hand and the faculty of desire on the other, or to put it more concisely, between nature and freedom. How can, according to Kant, the reflecting power of judgment bridge this gap? To understand his point, we should have a look at his theory of human mental faculties. Kant distinguishes famously between three mental faculties: that of cognition, that of desire, and that of taste. Cognition is our capacity to subsume given perceptions or intuitions under categories and thus deals with nature. Whereas desire means the capacity to identify the good and the bad and is thus governed by the moral law. We experience nature under the description of a priori laws, while we experience our practical agency as guided by freedom understood as autonomy. The faculty of taste, thirdly, then, is supposed to be intermediate in the sense that it connects and unites the two other capacities by identifying purposiveness. Since agents in the natural world seem to be able to realize their purposes, there must be room for that beyond the nexus of natural causality. This is simply a table of what I just said. There are three mental faculties, the Erkenntnisvermögen and the Begehrungsvermögen, and then the intermediate one, the Vermögen des Geschmacks, faculty of taste. And he says the achievement of the first is it subsumes intuitions other categories. The achievement of the third is it evaluates maxims in the light of the categorical imperative. And the intermediate one feels pleasure in the free interplay of imagination and understanding. And so the object is in the first case nature, in the third case freedom, and in the middle case art and biology and teleology, history, also all of them. Now, an interesting detail of this psychology of our cognitive faculties is that feeling, by which he means experiencing mental states of pleasure and displeasure, is in a sense the most fundamental way of dealing with reality at all, or at least so it seems. The judgment of taste based on the subjective feeling of purposiveness in the free interplay of imagination and understanding is what opens, according to Kant, our most basic access to reality, namely by constituting our original judgments. Now, given that Kant says that feeling is a non-discursive way of grasping reality, is what ultimately connects the realms of nature and of freedom, there seems to be a chance for a Arendian or Heideggerian reading to enter the Kantian picture. Doesn't the role of the power of judgment imply that the discursivity of our application of categories to intuitions and the presence of the moral law and its categorical imperative is ultimately based on the non-discursivity of feelings? In addition, according to Kant, the transcendental concept of purposiveness implies no assertion about objective ontology. Rather, the subjective principle of judgment only presents itself as if a mind had organized it according to the forms of agency of human beings. This sounds surprisingly close to pragmatism. Finally, look at what Kant says about the genius as the person who sets the standards for art. There is a first relevant quote, but maybe I skip that for reasons of time. And I only quote the second passage from the third critique. From this one sees that genius, firstly, is a talent for producing that for which no determinate rule can be given, not a presupposition of skill for that which can be learned in accordance with some rule. Consequently, that originality must be its primary characteristic. Secondly, that since there can also be original nonsense, its products must at the same time be models, i.e. exemplary. Hence, while not themselves the result of imitation, they must yet serve others in that way, i.e. as a standard or a rule for judging. Thirdly, that it cannot itself describe or indicate scientifically how it brings its product into being, but rather that it gives the rule as nature, and hence the author of a product that he owes to his genius does not know himself how the ideas for it come to him, and also does not have in its power to think up such things at will or according to plan, and to communicate to others precepts that would put them in a position to produce similar products. I stop here the quote. You see the general tendency of it. So the genius is a highly original sort of nature, a force of nature producing standards and rules, which are then followed by other artists. So Shakespeare set the rules for modern tragedy or something like that. It is the setting of standards a historical process? Is it valid for a certain context? Say, for instance, for the paradigm shift between later medieval, for instance, Gothic art, and the Renaissance style in architecture. If the answer is affirmative, and I think it must be affirmative, then we seem to have a strong bridge toward a Heideggerian perspective. And I skip the next thing here. It's too much, but now I come to my decisive point. The most elaborate attempt which goes into this direction of a Heideggerian reading of the third critique has been undertaken by the German scholar and philosopher Wolfgang Wieland in his book Judgment and Feeling, Urteil und Gefühl. It's a book from 2001. And firstly, it's important to note that Wieland is opposed to viewing philosophical aesthetics, which, as we know, constitutes the first part of the critique of judgment, as a theory of the beautiful and the sublime. Kant did not, according to Wieland, understand the term aesthetics in our modern sense of a philosophy of art, but in the sense of a general theory of perception. It is rather a generalized theory of judgment, according to Wieland. Wieland therefore assumes that Kant only uses the judgment of taste in order to be able to draw conclusions from it for a theory of our relationship to the world as a whole. The judgment of taste is, according to him, an example by which otherwise mostly hidden structures of subjectivity can be read without disguise. Wieland's thesis is now that we can understand from this example that every bivalent judgment always takes place in the mode of a feeling. Kant is concerned with demonstrating an emotional a priori of the power of judgment. Wieland claims that, according to Kant, feelings can take on an unjustifiable opening up function in human access to the world, which proves that the limits of conceptually founded objective cognition are not necessarily also the limits beyond which an area completely inaccessible to humans would immediately begin. From this point of view, the value of judgment of taste lies precisely in the fact that no object is recognized in it. Rather, the activity of the power of judgment can be identified most clearly, precisely, when the intellect and its categories play no role. Thus, the value predicate beautiful is merely an expression of the feeling of pleasure that arises in the subject in the face of a certain external perception, in which the free play of imagination and understanding behave particularly harmoniously towards each other. According to Kant, the judgment of taste is actually experienced and not made. Therefore, following Wieland, there should be a convergence of beauty and cognizability, which in the second part of the third critique, in the critique of teleological judgment, is based on the concept of purposiveness. This is why, according to Wieland, Kant attributes to every cognition, no matter how simple, a certain desire for reflection, without which not even ordinary experience would be possible. Every objective cognition presupposes a reflecting activity of the power of judgment and thus ultimately feeling. I skipped this quote from Wieland. According to Wieland, it is important that Kant, with his epistemology of the two sources, receptivity and spontaneity, breaks away from Descartes and Leibniz's view that feeling should be defined as confused thinking. Feeling is not confused thinking, it is the other way around. Feeling is presupposed in every sort of cognition, according to Wieland. The upshot of Wieland's interpretation is then the following. On the basis of his interpretation of Kant, he arrives at anti-realistic judgment that we humans have simply the undeniable desire for unity, regularity, and systematicity. And this desire or this feeling of the right sort of interplay is the guiding principle of how we see the world. I skip here a little bit of that, and I come to my objections against that standpoint, that reading. My first objection against Wieland's reading, and in general against those advanced by the Heidegger school, is that even in the third critique, Kant remains a generalist concerning rules. Despite his revision regarding the reflecting power of judgment, he does not become a particularist. He still defends an applicationism and does not convert to some sort of situationism or contextualism. The fact that the reflecting power of judgment invents the rules and does not discover them does not imply that these rules are derived from the perception of a given horizon or of a historical context. My second point is that Kant leaves no room for a plurality of different ways to reconcile the perspectives of nature and freedom. What he actually does is to describe only one valid form of this unification. The passages in which he does so are far away from the paragraphs on, for instance, the role of the genius for art, which ascribes to certain talented people the function of rule setting in a historical process. Look at how Kant describes the achievement of the power of judgment in uniting the two other mental capacities, and then I will come to an end. I quote, "The effect in accordance with the concept of freedom is the final end, which, or its appearance in the sensible world, should exist, for which the condition of its possibility in nature, in the nature of the subject as a sensible being, that is a human being, is presupposed. That which presupposes is a priori and without regard to the practical, namely the power of judgment, provides the mediating concept between the concepts of nature and the concept of freedom, which makes possible the transition from the purely theoretical to the purely practical, from lawfulness in accordance with the former to the final end in accordance with the latter, in the concept of a purposiveness of nature. For thereby is the possibility of the final end, which can become actual only in nature and in accord with its law cognized." End of quotation. So what Kant says here is that the power of judgment provides the mediating concept between nature and freedom by connecting our theoretical experience of the world with our practical experience. And this is only one solution and not one among several solutions. While such a mediation seems impossible, since freedom has no relevance for our experience of nature, nature has no relevance for our experience of freedom, we know that our freedom must have a causal effect on nature. Hence, the final end is the effect which must be the ultimate result of the use of freedom in the world of phenomena. The decisive achievement of the power of judgment consists precisely in this, namely in the interpretation of nature as proposal. I have now a little part, but I skipped that, about the question if the reflecting power is really an original invention in the third critique, and I think yes, but roughly it's the function which is achieved by the concept of ideas in the first critique. So in the first critique, you have in the canon chapter of the doctrine of method, the concept of ideas, and these ideas carry the burden of what he then ascribes to the reflecting power of judgment, I think, in the third critique. So it's not a radical innovation, but a shift of terminology. He goes to the term reflecting power of judgment instead of claiming that these are the ideas. It is the ideas which does the job of reconciling a manifold of things. So it's this quotation here, but I skip that, it's too much. And so I think that it is wrong to, or at least it's not clear that the Heideggerians are right, and maybe it's wrong to see Kant in general as some sort of Heideggerian. Yeah. So Kant was not born in Nestle.
Yeah, Christoph, thank you for your wonderful talking. Now we have time for some questions. Nick.
Thank you for this enlightening talk. I was wondering what the first question would be. I was wondering what place has Jasper on this reading, because I think maybe Jasper has more influence on this way that sometimes reads Kant's critique with the thinking on the political judgment, and not that much on Heidegger. So I would like only to, that's curiosity only, to know if there's a connection with Jasper's on the political writings on Kant. It doesn't refer directly to the third critique, but to this idea of exemplarity in political thought. And that's my first question. The second question would be about what you meant in the final comment on your talk about the changes between the first and the third critique, because you mentioned the canon as the first elaboration of what would be the reflective and determined judgment, but maybe in the appendix to the dialectics, I'm thinking on the distinction between the hypothetical use of reason and the apodetic use of reason, and I was wondering if we could see there in these two this distinction already, the distinction between reflective and determined judgment, and also if the difference between it's not only a terminological difference between the two expositions or the two ways of thinking, going to particular to the general and general to the particular, but if you can change it also the idea of purposiveness, the conception of purposiveness in the third critique, because the notion of God it's a bit different. It's a bit different between and in the first critique, because there's in the first critique we have an idea that the God that creates everything intentionally, and in the third critique this idea, it seems to me that this idea goes weaker, and there's not a God that we're creating, but only this purposiveness of nature as a principle, as a priori principle. So that would be a change.
Monique, thank you so much for these two extremely valuable remarks. It never came to my mind to look for a source in Jaspers. Never came to my mind, and you should indicate me what you are thinking about. So what I would like to defend, say for defending my reading, is that the faculty of judgment is discussed in Heidegger in this horizontal perspective. And this is, I think, behind her example of Achilles. So if Achilles, the hero from the Iliad, is the standard case of what heroism is about, then it belongs to a horizon of heroism, of warlike virtues of living in the world of the Homeric epics. So Achilles is one of the paradigmatic figures, and Odysseus is another figure. He's the smart guy, he is thoughtful, he knows how to achieve one's goal under difficult conditions without using power and violence and so on. So these are paradigmatic figures, and this is what Heidegger wanted to express by this phronesis claim with regard to Nicomachean Ethics 6. But it's perfectly possible that you are right concerning exemplarity and the sus in Jaspers, but you should look it up, and you should perhaps indicate me what you have in mind. Your second question, yeah, I should look it up. Also, what you said about the appendix of the transcendental, of the dialectic chapter of the first critique. What I have in mind is the following. The ideas, the concept of idea as something which organizes a manifold, a given manifold of things, since he believes, Kant says, we can never be satisfied with the situation of an unorganized manifold. Yeah? So it is in the interest of reason always to organize an existing manifold. And one famous example is his writing entitled Idea of a Universal History with Cosmopolitan Purpose. Then there he says, we cannot live with the mere fact that we have a manifold, we are facing a manifold of unconnected historical events, cruelties and absurdities occurring in every human situation, but we must see it from a unified standpoint. This explains what he does with the idea. And I think it's exactly what he does with the reflecting power of judgment in the third critique. That's my point of comparison, but I have to look it up what you are saying, and it's quite likely that you are right, at least to some extent. I have to look it up. So what I wanted to say is both the ideas and the reflecting power of judgment are terms of how our reason organizes manifolds, right? And makes sense of a meaningless, seemingly meaningless, incoherent sort of multiplicity.
Thank you for your excellent talk. I think it's very deep, and sometimes I did not follow exactly what that. I would like to know something, if you could say something about the end of your talk. It's about reflexive judgment and the relation that you made with the third critique with the first critique. Because I think that one of the perhaps a problem of the third critique is that Kant didn't have, he had three faculties before writing the critique, and only two critiques. And then the third critique, and he wrote for it. That now he was very, happy, and because finally he could write something, a critique about the third faculty, and he could imagine and he could grasp that there is in the a priori feeling of pleasure and displeasure. And then the third critique is about that. It's about feeling of pleasure and displeasure. And how could you connect this to the feeling of to the ideas in the critique of pure reason?
Yeah, thank you so much. As far as I know, it's a historical fact that he did not acknowledge three mental faculties before the third critique. So I think he discussed, or he thought about the faculty of taste, and then he said, oh, there must be three faculties, since the faculty of taste cannot be subsumed under cognition or under desire. So we have a facultas cognitiva, we have a facultas appetitiva, but neither, but taste, so determine that this is a beautiful bottle or something, or it's so beautiful, beautifully designed here, this bottle. This is not a cognition and it's not a appetitive idea. So it's not about goodness and desirability. So it must be a third independent way of coming to a statement. What makes this bottle so extremely beautiful is then something which I apply to it from a genuine faculty of taste. I think that was the origin. And he says then very famously that ultimately this depends on an interplay between understanding and imagination. And he has, in this sense, a non-substantive, non-Platonic idea of looking at the beautiful and the sublime. And you're right, ultimately it's about feeling, namely the feeling of pleasure and displeasure in what we are seeing. So if you share my conviction that this bottle is extremely beautiful, then you are sharing the same experience of the interplay of your imagination and understanding, namely you feel pleasure in regarding this bottle. And so it's a genuine third thing. But now the surprising element comes, namely that he says this third faculty is at the same time not only a third faculty, but it's the intermediate principle between the first and the third, or the first and the second. So he claims very surprisingly, and this brings Wieland to the idea. Maybe he wrote the third critique not to explain works of art on the one hand and biology and history and these obscure things which he was not really interested in, but what he wanted is to give a system, to give us the idea of a system. And the idea ultimately, I look to Nitta, would then be a coherentist one. Yeah? So his idea would then be coherentist in the following sense: whatever we are doing, how we are experiencing the world, is ultimately dependent on our mental faculties of cognition and of appetite, so desire, roughly speaking, and all of that is rooted in our feeling. And it has maybe even a historical dimension, so that the Heideggerian idea of a historicity of experiencing the world would be in Nietzsche present in Kant already. And this is a very interesting sort of interpretation, but I hope and I think it's a wrong one. But it's tempting, it's clearly tempting.
Next question before the lunch is Intamar's question.
Well, thank you very much for this brilliant talk, very thought-provoking. I have one question precisely related to, I would be very curious to see how you, as an Aristotle scholar, deal with the fact that Hannah Arendt and Kant resort to this tripartite division of labor between theoria, praxis, and poiesis from Aristotle. And as you just mentioned, that of course this wouldn't be like a Platonic idea of the beautiful, for instance. But of course, Heidegger was trying to come up with this phenomenological reading of Aristotle, precisely as you put it, to see how throughout the development of a Western philosophy, we were revisiting some of these conceptions in the way of our human experiencing of things in the world. So I found fascinating that you offered in a very seductive sense Wieland's account, just to make a criticism of this account. But I'd be curious to see how would you deal with the fact that Kant's and Arendt's account reflects somehow this Aristotelian division of labor, and how this would be, in the end, a way of contrasting deductive procedures where, of course, as you mentioned, you had this idea of a universality that is not to be confused with the procedures that we adopt in inductive accounts, where you have generalization coming from a particular case, but not necessarily to reach anything transcendental or universalizable in Kantian terms. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you are touching a very fundamental point, namely the point, is our theoretical view of the world basic or fundamental? And the Heideggerians say no. It's the practical perspective on the world which precedes, and then the theoretical experience of the world is only derivative, abkünftig. It's a derivation from the practical perspective. And in this NATORP report, Heidegger already claims very clearly, Aristotle was such a smart philosopher. He was very shortly before my insight, namely that phronesis is fundamental, but then he messes it up, since he says, oh yeah, ultimately theoria is even more important. So the intellectual virtue of theoria is the governing virtue, the architectonike, and it governs also phronesis. Since we ultimately have the capacity to objectively and neutrally see the world, like God does, the God of metaphysics lambda, we do the best job we can if we lead a theoretical life. And this is mistaken for Heidegger, but he says phronesis is such a wonderful thing, and he should have said phronesis is primary, is the primary sort of dealing with the world. So you are experiencing the world from a genuinely practical perspective, and only then, if being at time, for instance, if the hammer is broken, you see the hammer as a hammer, but only then in the mode of a problem, of a deficiency, you then are looking at the hammer as a hammer, but otherwise you are simply using the hammer. And for all the rest of our experience, so it is derivative in a sense, not to look first as the self-care, the Sorge, and so on. And Arendt and Wieland are taking this up clearly. And what Arendt is doing with Aristotle is to supplement his view of the poiesis-praxis distinction by labor, by work. So in the human condition, this threefold picture of activity, work, labor, fabrication, poiesis, and then the self, the activity which is valuable in itself, talking to others, being a political citizen. So the practice, the praxis, is only the third one. I think the entire thing is clearly a Heideggerian project, which desires to show how modernity went astray from a original mistake committed by Plato and by Aristotle, namely to put theoretical perspectives first, and then you have a completely mistaken view of the world, and you end up with modernity and consumerism and the a nuclear bomb. Yeah, that's her picture, and yeah, there seems to be some interesting stuff in it, but I wouldn't subscribe to that picture.
Thank you again, Christoph, for the talk, for the discussion. Now we have our break. Uma boa tarde, uma boa pausa, melhor dito, até já. E daqui a pouquinho nós voltamos com as nossas atividades. Obrigado. Ja, danke. Jetzt haben wir ausgiebig Zeit für das Mittagessen. Ja.